Raise your hand if you are a younger brother or sister. Okay, so the good news is that you have a distinct advantage should you wish to become a world champion in your chosen sport. So congratulations. Now, for those of you who didn't raise their hands, don't worry if you want to become a world champion in your chosen sport. You still can do. It's just going to be a little bit harder. Now, in order to help me explain, let me take you back to when I was about 10 years old and playing in the garden with my brother at home. We used to play cricket, a sport that can take 5 days to complete and even longer to explain. So I'll spare you the details. All you need to know is that the garden version of it involved my brother bowling a ball from about 5 yards away as hard as he could towards me, and the aim to hit these kind of wooden stumps behind me kind of resembled part of Stonehenge or something like that. Now, my goal was to try and hit the ball with this overpriced piece of wood, something which very rarely happened given the speed that he was bowling at. When the roles were reversed, he would have no problem slogging the ball to the next solar system due to my pathetic attempt at bowling. Now, that was okay because he was bigger than me, he was older than me. He was actually quite good at cricket as well, which meant that I had very few opportunities to look good. So one day, however, probably by luck more than anything else, I connected sweetly with the ball. The ball went flying across the garden, landed underneath a bush, and as he went off to disappear and find it, I was stood there for the first time with time to think. How did I do that? I remember coming to two conclusions. One is that I kept my eye on the ball, and the other is that I kept a straight bat. From that point onwards, I became obsessed with doing these two things really well. Keep an eye on the ball, keep a straight bat. Over time, I started to get better at it. My motivation for going and playing was to get better at these two things. And then one day, I got good enough at those two things that I hit the ball enough times that I scored enough points to beat him. That was the day he folded up his arms, went inside and said, "Don't want to play this anymore." And I don't think we've ever played cricket since either. Now, little did I realize at the time, but this was the genesis of a mindset later coined younger brother syndrome. It's something I want to come back to at the end. However, first, I want to ask the question, a question that perhaps we've all asked ourselves at some point, especially if we've ever endeavored to be as good as we can at something. How do we know our true potential? Whether it's playing a sport, whether it's starting a musical instrument, first day at work, or even starting your own business, how do we know how good we could be? One thing's for sure, and that's that knowledge is no longer our biggest barrier to success. We live in a world where we can pretty much learn anything from Google, from how to change a bicycle tire all the way to how to wire a house. Although, having said that, I'm pretty sure that Google has done nothing to diminish the number of failed DIY projects in my home. However, it is pretty good at finding people who can fix them for me. And I imagine that Google, if I relied on it to, say, decommission a nuclear reactor, I'd probably suffer some confidence issues at some point during the process. This is because understanding something rationally is very different to the lived experience of actually doing it. A footballer steps up to take a penalty in the dying moments of the game. He steps up and boots the ball wide, not because he hasn't practiced taking penalties for the last 10 years of his career, but because the lived experience of being in that moment is very different. A stock market trader loses millions on the stock market because he should have pulled out of a position much earlier than he did. It wasn't that he didn't have a plan that stopped him from doing that, because he did. But he hadn't accounted for the influx of stress hormones and chemicals that made the emotional reality of making that call very, very different. Now, this is something that every performer has to contend with, and it's something that I'm passionate about in the world of performance psychology, both from a scientific perspective, but also through the work I do with some people who are the very best in the world at what they do. These people have many qualities, but one in particular that I think guides their focus and control in almost any situation, and it also allows them to learn new skills quicker and more accurately than many other people. The skill that I'm talking about is visualization, also known as imagery or mental rehearsal, a vital component of mental preparation. People for me, it sounds sophisticated enough to give myself an inflated view of my own self-importance when I'm actually delivering this to other people. However, that was until I saw my 2-year-old nephew who was doing this without any formal training whatsoever. It was when my brother and I took him to a fairgrounds. And we thought, because we weren't particularly good with roller coasters, he would just want to stick to the merry-go-round and maybe those little tame teacups that go round gently. Oh no. He found the biggest roller coaster and said that he wanted to go on it. In moments, we found ourselves at the back of the queue, with many opportunities for him to turn back because it was quite a long queue. He was there kind of ruminating on the significance of his decision. But eventually we got to the front of the queue. And at that point, I saw him doing something which I wish I'd been able to video. He closed his eyes, and in his imagination, he imagined every single twist and turn of the roller coaster that he had just been watching for the last 10 minutes. No one had taught him to do this. What he was doing was internally recreating that environment in order to be able to better control the reality of being there. This is something which many elite performers do deliberately. It's something we all do, but we don't necessarily do it as consciously as we could do and should do. There are a number of things that happen when we do this. And for the brain, thinking is the same as doing. In young Freddie's brain, what was happening was that by imagining doing something, he was using exactly the same neural pathways as if he was actually doing it. What's more is that the more accurate you use that imagination, so the same sights, sounds, smells, doing it in real time, the more accurate the pathway that we carve out for ourselves. Now, people who do this on a day-to-day basis effectively enjoy many benefits. Not least, visualization allows us to learn and reproduce skills more quickly, accurately, and smoothly. An amazing study at Stanford University demonstrated that elite gymnasts using focused visualization were able to execute complex skills that they've been working on for over a year, execute them for the first time. It also allows us to manage our expectations and emotions more effectively. When we imagine doing something scary, we are going to feel scared. That's a reality. But we can either imagine it or we can wait until we're there actually doing it. And therefore, elite performers tend to evoke these feelings up front so that they can practice dealing with them before time. We can avoid repeating the same mistakes. I think this is because visualization isn't just about imagining the future, but it's also about being able to recall accurately what's happened in the past. We also maintain presence of mind in high-pressure situations. We experience greater commitment and motivation. And we also experience more confidence in our own ability, and I think over time, also in ourselves. Now, to bring some of these things to life, I want to take you to the small town of Lillehammer in Norway. This is where I first had the opportunity to work in the Olympic sport of skeleton. Working with these slightly crazy athletes shone a light on the profound importance of being able to prime our brain before undertaking complex skills. Here we have a sport where athletes travel down ice at around 90 miles an hour, their chin just an inch off the ground. Going around corners, they experience pressures of up to 5G, the same as a fighter jet pilot. All of this whilst reserving the spare mental capacity to be able to think clearly, make good decisions, and drive the sled to pinpoint accuracy. That's probably the equivalent of being towed behind a car on a country road, speeding along whilst trying to do your 17 times table. It's a pretty amazing thing to have to be able to do. The thing is, this isn't their only challenge, believe it or not. Because of the pressures on their body, they only get the opportunity to slide 2 or 3 times a day. That's 2 or 3 minutes of physical training every day. Now, if you subscribe to Erickson's 10,000 hour rule, the rule that suggests that it takes 10,000 hours of deliberate practice in order to become master at a skill, then we're going to run into serious problems. I worked out earlier, that was about 1,300 years of training for these guys. Therefore, visualization isn't just something that adds value to training, it's something that becomes essential. And despite visualization being quite an intuitive skill, the idea of training in motionless silence is a little bit alien even to these athletes, but it's something that they have to get used to doing. So, can we extend these principles beyond lycra-clad athletes and into the realms of other parts of life, in everyday life? Well, here I think we see some profound implications. When someone suffers a stroke due to an arterial blood clot, blood is prevented from getting to the parts of the brain that it once fed. And without these oxygen and nutrients feeding them, those tissues die, and slowly too do the surrounding tissues around it. But when the sufferer imagines moving the limbs that may have been paralyzed as a result, blood flow increases to the parts of the brain affected, thereby diminishing the damage done to those areas of the brain. There are two really important messages here for me. Firstly, we are able to control blood flow around the brain at will using our imagination. That's pretty amazing. But secondly, in order to do this effectively, we have to have a positive focus. In other words, we've got to be able to focus on what we do want rather than just on what we don't want. It's a bit like me saying to you, don't think of a yellow car. If I say to you, don't think of a yellow car, you think of a yellow car, probably. The more I say to you, don't think of a yellow car, the more you think of a yellow car. So what's the positive focus? How do you not think of a yellow car? Maybe you think of a blue car. And in the absence of this positive focus, the problem is what happens is that blood flow tends to move to the emotional centers of the brain, especially during high-pressure performance, geared around fear and uncertainty. This is exactly what Deke Helton and his team at the University of Christchurch found in 2010 following the devastating earthquake there. They found that whereas some people were able to refocus and get on with their day-to-day life in relative normality, other people really struggled to get on with day-to-day activities. Activities such as conducting their work, remembering to turn up to appointments, and even just ordering their usual cup of coffee. So what was differentiating those people who struggled in the aftermath of an earthquake compared to those who perhaps had more resilience? Well, in the looming threat of follow-up earthquakes, those people who were unable to visualize their day-to-day goals experienced greater blood flow to the emotional centers of the brain that enhance fear and uncertainty. And actually, in doing so, inhibited the areas of the brain responsible for positive action. Conversely, those more resilient were able to effectively visualize and stay focused on their day-to-day goals, thereby sending much more blood flow to the areas of the brain responsible for decision-making, problem-solving, and general positive action. It was therefore these people who ended up more resilient under threats. Now, what can we all take away from this? And how can I help you go away and visualize yourself to success? Well, in order to take advantage of this great skill, I think we've first got to remove two barriers. And these are the two barriers that I see as most commonly getting in the way of people to visualize successfully. Firstly, I'm too busy. We've heard it before. There's a huge paradox here. Visualization requires us to slow down and deepen our focus. Therefore, visualization is, and given that that's the complete opposite of what the brain would normally do under pressure, visualization is therefore something that we would need to do at the times when we're probably least inclined to do it. Now, elite performers recognize this, and therefore they deliberately put time into their day to be able to do it. And finally, success removes the need to get better. And this takes us back to playing in the garden with my brother at home. You see, the reason why younger siblings have a distinct advantage in competitive sports is because in the absence of too many opportunities to win at an early stage, they become much more intrinsically motivated by the mastery of what they do, rather than simply the outcome of what they do. And in nurturing more time and effort in the quality of processes that get them there, It means that they have greater access to the very ingredients that make them feel more confident and in control when the stakes are raised. This is probably the single biggest paradox in the psychology of success. We allow ourselves to get so distracted by the outcome of what we do, whether it be winning, beating other competitors, winning new work, notoriety, success. And actually in doing so, we often neglect the very quality of processes, learning, creativity that allowed us to get there in the first place, thereby hindering our true potential. Visualization, therefore, becomes something that we once did when we were learning and getting better, and something that we stopped doing when we allowed ourselves to believe that we'd made it. Thank you very much.